Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on one of the biggest power shifts in modern history. We're talking about how the US dollar kicked the British pound off its throne to rule the entire global economy. It's a wild story, full of empire, debt, and, well, power.
So picture this. It's 1947. The British government makes an announcement that just shocks the world. All of a sudden, the pound sterling, the currency that had dominated global trade for a solid century, starts to unravel. For anyone paying attention, especially on Wall Street, the writing was on the wall. The old card was done.
So that's the big mystery, right? How in the world did this happen? How did the US dollar almost silently snatch the crown from the world's oldest and most powerful empire? That is the exact question we are digging into today.
Okay, so here's our game plan. First, we're going to look at the pound in its glory days. Then, we'll watch it all fall apart. After that, we'll see how the dollar was crowned the new king and, get this, how it managed to stay on top even after ditching gold. And finally, we'll ask that really big question, could history be about to repeat itself?
All right, let's kick things off with part one, the pound's golden age. To really get this, you've got to travel back in time with me, back to the 19th century, to see just how unbelievably dominant the British pound actually was.
So after Napoleon was defeated at Waterloo back in 1815, Britain was, without a doubt, the world's superpower. But here's the thing. It wasn't just about their navy. The real power, the real conquest, was happening in the counting houses and banks of London. The pound became the one currency everyone used for pretty much everything.
And this slide just lays it out perfectly. Britain's power was built on these two giant pillars. On one side, you had the military might, the Royal Navy controlling the seas, making sure trade routes were open for Britain, of course. And on the other side, you had financial might. The pound sterling was financing everything, from railways in India to cotton in Egypt. The military protected the money, and the money paid for the military. It was a brilliant, self-reinforcing loop.
So, you might be wondering, why did everyone trust the pound so much? Well, the answer is the gold standard. And this wasn't some abstract economic theory. It was a rock-solid promise. For every single pound note out there was actual, physical gold sitting in the vaults of the Bank of England. That meant the government couldn't just fire up the printing presses, you know? It created this incredible trust, and that trust became the very foundation of global trade.
But as you've probably guessed, that golden age was not going to last. And that brings us right to our second chapter, an empire's unraveling. It's ironic, really. The very wars that cemented Britain's power also planted the seeds of its financial ruin. Victory, it turns out, has a very, very high price tag.
In this timeline here, man, it shows you just how fast the dominoes fell. In 1914, they have to suspend the gold standard to pay for World War I. Boom. By 1918, the war's over, and for the first time ever, the world's banker, Great Britain, is now a debtor nation, owing money to America. Then, in 1925, they try to go back to the gold standard, but they get the exchange rate all wrong, and it just crushes their economy. And then the final blow in 1931, they're forced to abandon gold for good.
To really feel the impact of this, just look at the numbers. Before World War I, Britain's national debt was around £650 million. Manageable, right?
And then, just 4 years later, it had exploded to $7.5 billion. That's more than a tenfold increase. The cost of winning the war was basically bankruptcy. Suddenly, London wasn't the world's creditor anymore. New York was.
You know, the final blow didn't come from a cannon or a battleship. It came from something much quieter, a financial panic. In 1931, investors around the world just lost faith. They all rushed to the Bank of England at once, demanding their gold back in exchange for their pounds. The vaults were drained, and, just like that, the financial bedrock of the British Empire crumbled. This spectacular collapse left a huge power vacuum at the center of the world. And that leads us to part 3. The dollar is crowned. While Europe was basically in ruins after 2 devastating wars, a new power was ready to step up and write the new rules of the game.
The whole thing went down in 1944 at a fancy hotel in a little town called Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. You had delegates from 44 countries there, but really only one country held all the cards. The U.S. was untouched by the war, its factories were booming, and it held most of the world's gold. It was the only nation strong enough to build a new system from the ground up.
And the system they came up with, it was just brilliant in its simplicity. Here's how it worked. The US dollar was pegged directly to gold at a fixed rate of $35 an ounce. Then every other major currency was pegged to the dollar. So in reality, the dollar just kind of became the new gold. It was the new anchor for the entire global economy.
And if anyone out there still had any doubts about who was in charge, the Suez Crisis in 1956 shut them up for good. Britain tried to flex its old imperial muscle, but the US wasn't having it. They didn't send troops, they just used financial pressure. They threatened Britain's economy, and Britain was forced into a humiliating retreat. The message to the world was loud and clear. The pound was a relic, the dollar was now king.
But here's where the story takes another crazy turn. The dollar's connection to gold, well, it wasn't permanent. And that brings us to Chapter 4, the oil and debt web. The big question was, what happens when the world's anchor decides to just cut the rope?
And that's exactly what happened on August 15, 1971. President Nixon gets on TV and announces that the U.S. will no longer exchange dollars for gold. It was called the Nixon shock, and it sent ripples through the entire world. The global anchor was gone. The dollar was now a fiat currency, backed by nothing but faith in the U.S. government. It was chaos, but America had a new plan up its sleeve.
Okay, so with gold out of the picture, the dollar needed a new foundation, something to force everyone to keep using it. And it found that foundation in oil. Through a quiet but game-changing deal with Saudi Arabia, the U.S. made sure that the world's most important commodity, oil, would be priced only in U.S. dollars. Think about that. If you were a country and you needed to buy oil to run your economy, which everyone did, you had to get your hands on U.S. dollars first. It created this massive, artificial, and permanent demand for American currency.
And this is what the modern system looks like. It's like this giant, complex web. On one hand, it's a safety net. In a global crisis, the U.S. Federal Reserve can be the lender of last resort, pumping out dollars to stabilize everything. But on the other hand, it's a trap. It creates this incredible dependency. Every other country is kind of stuck, needing dollars to trade, to buy energy, to survive, even if they don't like being under America's thumb.
Okay, all of this brings us to our final and maybe most important section. History's final echo? We've seen exactly how the mighty British pound fell from grace. So, are we seeing the same warning signs for the dollar today?
I mean, look around. The challenges to the dollar's dominance are everywhere, and they're not subtle. You've got rival currencies like the euro and China's yuan. You've got the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, actively working on ways to trade with each other without using the dollar. This whole idea of de-dollarization, it's not just a talking point anymore. For some very big countries, it's now official policy.
And when you put the two side by side, it is just uncanny. Look at the fall of the pound, crippling war debt, the huge cost of maintaining a global empire, and the rise of a new competitor, the USA. Now look at the dollar's dilemma today. The U.S. is the world's largest debtor nation. It has an enormous global military presence to pay for, and it's facing the rise of new rivals like China and the BRICS bloc. The parallels are honestly kind of spooky.
So here's the thought I want to leave you with. Every empire, every dominant power in history believes its system is permanent, that it'll last forever. The British certainly thought so, and for decades the dollar has felt just as unshakable. But what history teaches us again and again is that these systems are not forever. They're built on a delicate balance of power and trust can be lost. The real question isn't if the system will change, but when, and will you be able to recognize the signals before it's front-page news?